Welcome back, and in this segment we will be continuing talking about the army in ancient Egypt, especially during the New Kingdom era. The ancient Egyptians created a strong army to maintain Egypt's security. Also, the Egyptians made military campaigns at regular intervals in order to secure the borders and to sustain a regular supply of prisoners, herds of cattle and exotic products from the north, east, south and west. And to shed more light on that topic and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio with Egyptologist Mr. Samir Abbas. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Samir. Mr. Samir, to start with talking about the army in ancient Egypt, you have been talking about that during the two past episodes. So can you wrap up about the talk about the Old Kingdom and the army back then before talking about the New Kingdom?
Okay, sure. So the reason why I suggested dividing it in different because the army is a very rich topic when it comes to the ancient history in general, and especially to more specify the ancient Egyptian history. So we are proud to have the first organized army in the history of mankind. So in the first and second episode, we talked about the foundation of the army and the ethics of the army in the Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom as well. It is quite interesting to know that the reason behind the foundation of the Egyptian army, it wasn't for taking over other foreign lands, it was mainly to secure our borders and to protect Egypt from the illegal immigrants. That was as early as the Old Kingdom, and we are talking about nearly 5,300 years ago, 3,300 BC. Later on, when Egypt suffered from Egypt divided by the end of the Old Kingdom, there was 150 years where the country divided into different states, and there was no army, there was no unified army. It was like militias, belongs to the different state rulers. That's why there was another reason for another great leader. His name is Mentuhotep Nebhebet from the south, to unify the army, to unify Egypt again under his leadership and starting a new era, which is the Middle Kingdom. In the Middle Kingdom, there was a new approach of the army. So Egypt started to look for investing in other countries, and when it comes to investing in outside of the border, they looked at Nubia, at the south of Egypt, because that was the most important source of different products which is needed in Egypt, especially gold. And that was a new task added to the army, not only to secure Egyptian borders, but also to secure Egypt trade and economy. And that's why a famous king like Senusert III from the Middle Kingdom, he ruled Egypt nearly 1700 BC, 3,700 years ago. He used the army to build fortress along the cataract to the south of Egypt, as far as the third cataract in the south, in the heart of Sudan now, and the fortress was built in a way to defend their trade and to use as a storehouses as well to collect the goods and the trades before traveling in a convoy along the Nile River to the north. So, and then there was a big setback happens when Egypt has been invaded by the Hyksos. And the Hyksos, they are different tribes organized from the Middle East. Some of them, they were tribes living in Egypt already, and they took over the north part of Egypt, and that was starting a third period or a second period of invasion, or a second period of, we call the second intermediate period. Second intermediate period, right? And that was when the country divided into two different parts. North under the control of the Hyksos, and south under the control of Egyptian native family from the south. So what happened was quite interesting. There was a family which is led by Sekten Ra and Camus, and then Ahmos after that, and the devoted wife and mother, which is behind.
That was in the New Kingdom.
That was in the New Kingdom, and there was a very interesting discussions which happens between these leaders in the south with their army officers and with their army generals, which is in that time the reason why Egypt has been taken over, because many of the army officers or generals in that time, they were corrupted, and they wanted to keep their...
The generals were corrupted.
Yes, they wanted to keep their business with the Hyksos. And that was very obvious in some of the documentation and meetings and discussion between Camus and Ahmos with the army general to support his military campaign. They refused, and they said, we prefer to keep our investments and so they gave them a chance to herd our cattle in the north. So, and that's why Camus and Ahmos, he seeked the individuals, the commoners, the farmers, and he managed to win the battle against the Hyksos and kicking them out of Egypt, unifying Egypt again, and that was the beginning of a new period, which is the new kingdom. So there was a new approach of the army in that time. You know, for the first time, the army started to lead a campaign to the northeast. And they called it a preemptive strikes, which is other word, which is like a defense mechanism.
Why would they do a preemptive strike, Mr. Abbas?
So they figured out that the best way, you know, to protect their borders is to destroy their enemy outside of the border before they attack. And we're talking about strategy, which is held in ancient Egypt nearly 3,500 years ago, 1500 BC. And so the most famous names, which is, you know, led the army in these preemptive strikes or campaigns outside of Egypt, Ahmos, that shortly after defeating the Hyksos, you know, he made it, you know, he followed them outside of Egypt, and then following him, another famous one, which is Thutmose I, and Thutmose I, you know, he took the campaign even far away. They became a competition between the different kings who will go further, and he make it all the way to Iraq, you know, and in that time, you know, he came back was very upset from his campaigns because there was no fight. Everybody was scared, ran away from them, and he haven't had a chance to have a real fight.
And Mr. Abbas, we are seeing here Thutmose.
Then we come to Thutmose III, which is one of the most famous leaders when it comes to the army in the history of ancient Egypt. Thutmose III, he is a grandson of Thutmose I. And Thutmose III, he led the Egyptian army again in campaigns in the Middle East. And he is the first empire builder in the whole history of mankind.
That would bring us to the Battle of Megiddo, which is very important. Until now, it is taught till now at the military academies, and even later on Montgomery was almost called described that he is almost like Thutmose III. So would you tell us more about that battle? And
Sure. You know, Montgomery, Megiddo, that was made Thutmose III famous. And when it comes to Megiddo, that was a very decisive battle for the Egyptian army. So there was two routes to the battle in the Middle East, and the two routes to the middle. One of them, which is the easy way, it is a longer route but wide, a very wide valley. It's a common route to go to Megiddo. Thutmose III, he chose a different approach, a shortcut through a very narrow valley in the mountain. And that was completely opposed by the army council in that time. He was very young and very excited and very well educated, by the way. And he decided to take this route, even when he will not have a chance for more than 1 or 2 soldiers to cross this valley together, which is mean that the front of the army will be very narrow. But his point is the enemy already expecting them from the other route, from the common route. If he surprises them from coming of the other route, that will be a big surprise, and that's exactly what happens. And he made a decisive victory in this battle. And because of this victory, the borders of Egypt extended as far as ancient Iraq, as far as Turkey, and as far as the heart of Sudan, which is the Fourth Cataract.
Another important warrior king is Ramses II, and of course one of his most famous battles is the Battle of Kadesh. Yeah, would you tell us more about that?
So first of all, there's 2 versions of Ramses II and the Battle of Kadesh. You know, so I know that some
Why
people.
There are 2 versions?
I know that some people might get upset
Egyptian
from me.
version and the Hittite version. Can you tell us more about it now?
I know that some people might get upset from me today.
No, but there are
history,
2 versions.
So there is there's 2 versions, and there is different perspective always of history. So the classical version is Ramesses, he fought the Hittites and he defeated them, and he took over their lands, and he was celebrating every year with his decisive victory over the Hittites. That is the classical version, and he used his media tool and his media propaganda machine to promote for that in the world of his temples. Almost every temple built or decorated by Ramesses II.
We are seeing here the Kadesh battle.
I'm afraid to say that that's
not Kadesh.
training, army training. You know, that's a military training from the Middle Kingdom, which is showing that how sophisticated the Egyptian army was. So, which is not only giving training with weapons, but even in wrestling. And in this scene, there is more than 190 different wrestling positions in one team. That's like 3,000.
These positions were used during the battles, Mr.
It was
Abbas?
important to train the soldiers to be ready for to fight with, even without a weapon. If they lose their weapon, they're still able to fight. So going back to Ramses, the two, you know, so that was the classical version, and he didn't waste any chance for introducing this version, you know, in all over the temples he built or decorated. But the other version, which is, that's the sad news, is that might be only a fake victory and promoted as a real victory. Especially that Qadish itself, it was under Egyptian control until his father's time, Sidi I. And then in Ramses II, after fighting for 20 years against the Hittites, we never had a control over Qadish back. And after 20 years of fight, Qadish is still under the control of the Hittites, and he signed a peace treaty with the Hittites, which is, and he married a daughter of the king of the Hittites as well, which is, if you are defeating your enemy for 20 years, you know, there was a big question mark why he signed a peace treaty with them after that. This is a true version, and myself, I'm more fan of the second version. There is more documentation proving that. And then, after Ramses II, you know, we'll come to another famous one. He was Ramses III. And Ramses III is famous for leading the Egyptian army in the first documented marine battle, Navy battle, in the history of mankind. And during that time, there were big problems, civil wars in the Middle East and in the Mediterranean Sea, including Greek and the Greek islands as well. And they decided, you know, so this map is showing the Egyptian empire, the New Kingdom, especially the 18th dynasty, more specified to Thutmose III, which is, as far as I mentioned, as far as an ancient Iraq, South Turkey, and the heart of Sudan. So, in Ramses III, you know, so there was a big challenge. There was a collapsing economy and civil wars and famines in the Mediterranean world and the Middle East. And that's why there was lots of immigrants. They jumped in boats with their families across the Mediterranean Sea, from the north to the south. It's completely the other way around, which is happening today. They were trying to force immigrations into the border, which is exactly like what happened today, but the other way around.
Yeah, that's
the other way around. And one of the very famous battles, which is, I think that I have a scene for that from the temple of Habu in Luxor.
The Habu Temple.
Habu Temple, exactly, you know, the outside wall, showing Ramses III with the troops, which is facing this invasion, you know, with boats, you know, to stop them from taking over Egyptian lands.
That would bring us to the idea of the composition of the Egyptian army in the New Kingdom, because there were certain components or several components added to it, including the navy. So would you tell us more about the composition of the army during the New Kingdom, please?
Okay, so first of all, there was different divisions of the army, and that, by the way, that was vary from a king from a period to another. But generally speaking, there was an army council, and the army council is formed from the top army generals. And it's quite interesting that, you know, that in every battle scene, in every documentation of a battle, we see the king not taking a decision his own, but he has to consider counseling the army council before that. Even Ramses II, you know, in his famous scenes in Abu Simbel Temple, you see in the middle of the scene, you know, before going in, like fighting fighting in Qadish, he counseled the army generals first. But it doesn't mean that the king, he has to follow the decisions which is made by the army council. He might make a different decisions, but he has to listen first to their opinions. So that was one of the very important of the army divisions in that time. Second, we have the king division, which is the strongest and the fastest, which has the fastest horses and the fastest horse chariots. And when it comes to the horse chariots, we know that the chariot itself is an invention of the Hyksos, who invaded Egypt. But the wheel itself, that was already invented in ancient Egypt from the Middle Kingdom.
Yes.
And they use it to build siege tower so they can attack fortress. So, but there was no practical reason for using the wheel in ancient Egyptian daily life, because they used to move heavy things in the Nile River in sleds, so the wheels wasn't very common. So another important division of the army. So the Egyptian army, they started adapting mercenaries, and some of the first.
Why did they adapt? They hired mercenaries.
Okay, you know, for Nubians, They have a Middle Kingdom, a New Kingdom as well. So they known as a very good in using their bows. And that's why the Egyptian army adapted that. But there is also another interesting fact when it comes to the bows in ancient Egypt. From ancient Egyptian culture perspective, it was a shame for an army officer or a soldier to fight somebody from to kill somebody from a distance.
Okay.
So they have to fight face to face.
To show courage and bravery.
To show, exactly. And that explains why in many of the art pieces from the Old Kingdom, like the statue of Zoser in Imhotep Museum, and from the Middle Kingdom, and from the New Kingdom Gallery, when you go to the New Kingdom Gallery in the Egyptian Museum, you will find that Thutmose III, Amenhotep, standing on bows, standing on 9 bows. And that's a symbolism of the enemy's weapons, which is the Egyptian army, they don't like to use it quite often because they prefer to fight face to face with sword or with axes in that time. So the bows in ancient Egyptian army wasn't a good tool for fighting, and that's why they haven't used it for a very long time. Also, and when they needed to use it, they brought those who can use it very well, which is Nubians.
I think also because they consider it an uncivilized tool. It was used for hunting in primitive times. So it's the type as if these are nomads. They are not as civilized as the Egyptians in a sense. I'm not sure. Do you agree with that or not?
That's another approach. You know, and it could be more than one reason. You know, for
no, I mean in addition to, of course.
Yes, exactly. That could be more than one reason. So that was like in brief the history of Egyptian army in the New Kingdom. Mentioning some famous names, you know, we talked about Mentuhotep Nebhabet-Ra, we talked about Kamus, Ahmos,
what about Pasmaticus? Because he used mercenaries as well, but from a totally different area.
Exactly, that's very interesting actually. And from my perspective, that is the beginning of the collapse of the Egyptian army.
And I don't want to mention the area because I want you to tell us about it.
Okay, so first of all, in that time there was a very well developed warriors in Greece and Macedonia, and on the same time the army suffered in the late period from different period of declines, economical and power collapse, especially when Egypt has been invaded and controlled by families not from Egyptian backgrounds. We have a Libyan dynasties ruled in Egypt, we have Nubian dynasties ruled in Egypt, and later on we have Assyrians and Persians ruled as well. But the quite interesting thing that Libyans and Nubians, when they ruled in Egypt, they ruled in Egypt by Egyptian style. You know, they declared themselves as a pharaohs to make sure that will be respected. So, and it seemed that these periods, they focus on dismantling the Egyptian army because they don't want to have a resistance, and they know that the Egyptian soldier will not tolerate having a foreigner ruling him. And because of that, when Pasmatic, when he decided to build an army, there was no good infrastructure for building an army, and there was no training has been given for the army in purpose for a very long time, and that's why he decided to seek
it's always a pleasure, of course, to know about the ancient Egyptian history, but unfortunately we did run out of time. Mr. Samir Abbas, our Egyptologist, thank you very much, sir, for your precious input and for telling us about our history.
Well, yes, indeed, and by this we come to the end of this episode of Breakfast Show. But first of all, I have to thank my colleague. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And make sure to continue following us on Nile TV International for more coming up, and also to keep updated and to keep tuned to our next episode of Breakfast Show tomorrow with a new crew. Until then, have a good day.